Thank you for meeting with us. We have a guest today, Ken Stanger, here as well. So, hi, Ken. Thank you for taking the time. This is sort of an example of how I'm going to ask you guys to do your interviews. You're going to find one person in your community or your family to interview to help us answer this question of whether you think the Grand Coulee Dam is mostly a positive thing or mostly a negative thing for our community and for our state. So I want you guys to practice seeing, multiple sides to a conflict and deciding for yourself sort of where you land on that topic. So I guess first of all, Ken, who are you sort of as a person and in our community, and sort of what perspective do you think you can help us on this topic?
Well, I'm 76 years old, so I'm an elder of the tribe. I've lived here all my life. Graduated from Coulee Dam High School, which was part of the consolidation for Lake Roosevelt. I'm a member of the school board, and I'm also a member of the Washington State School Directors Association. So it's been my joy to be able to work with the school district and on the issues of the Grand Coulee Dam. Been at the bottom of the dam through high school, junior high school, and been in and around the dam for many, many, many years, and have both positive. There's many positives for the dam. On the negative side, I guess, being a tribal member, was the fact that the loss of the salmon, the loss of the habitat, probably some of the issues that affected the tribes over the years, with the loss of about 21,000 acres of real estate. Many homes were having to be moved because of Lake Roosevelt and Lake Rufus Woods. The removal of grave sites, removal of just a lot of the communities behind the dam and below the dam. But the positive side is that it pretty much did what it was being supported to do. The original purpose of the dam was to bring hydropower to the Northwest United States and have the Grand Coulee Dam become a major source of irrigation and flood control all up and down the Columbia, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. A lot of people don't remember that the idea for the Grand Coulee Dam didn't just happen because of the Reclamation Act of 1931 or 1933. There were conversations by different people going back as far as 1892. So in 2020, I think the positive side of the Grand Coulee Dam far outweighs the negatives, even though I would like to see the issue of the salmon and the habitat restored to the Columbia, both below and above the Grand Coulee Dam.
So I know there is some talk about and some action being taken to make that happen, right? With the reintroduction of salmon and things like that. Have you heard about that?
Yes, sir. In fact, there is a lot of dialogue. The Upper Columbia River group is working very hard on it, and there have been a number of studies, both in process and completed, regarding the best methods to be able to transport the different species of salmon and steelhead up and through the Grand Coulee Dam. And I really believe that at some point in time it's going to happen. You've got to get past Chief Joe Dam first and then into the Columbia. But I think that with everybody's interest now, it's back as a priority. It hasn't been a priority by Congress and Bureau of Reclamation or BPA or the state of Washington, but I believe that there's a movement now to see the benefit of it far above just having salmon flowing in a river. There's
Yeah. So that's one of the that's why my family ended up in originally in Seattle. Was my grandfather was a marine biologist and an engineer and helped build the fish ladder over in the locks over there. Um, and that was one of our questions from one of my students, Chloe Walowitza, who asked why do you think they didn't put a fish ladder or something similar when they built the dam back
well,
then?
in reading an original study that I just did last night in preparation for
Oh,
some
cool.
of the questions, there really were five major negative reasons.
Hmm.
First of all, was the fact that the height of the Grand Coulee Dam at 570 feet plus um, would require the location of a ladder for both the upstream salmon as they go to spawn, as well as the downstream migration of the young salmon going back to the Pacific. So that was a major question. Secondly, was the uh, biologic or the water requirements for being able to uh, enable that salmon migration to go. There was a question regarding the fact that although they might get salmon upstream, there's certain periods of the year where the water flow doesn't happen over the dam. And so the generators that are in place would have a major impact on especially the younger salmon, the seedlings, because there would be no way to develop or locate mesh that would protect that downriver situation going into the generators. Again, if salmon were above the Grand Coulee Dam and had to survive for those periods when water flow doesn't go over the dam, then the lack of vegetation or other food sources for the salmon might create starvation for those that are behind the dam. But those were some of the issues brought up.
Wow. Okay. So there's definitely lots of different reasons why they had to. So it maybe considered it, but it was just too much of a feat to do at the time. Maybe. Yeah. So it sounds like there's lots to talk about salmon and fish, and obviously that's a very very close piece of plateau native culture, specifically around here. So that's another question from Kendra Duclos: is did the dam cause harm to any native tribes or traditions? So I would add to that, like if a lot of the tribal traditions were based around salmon, I guess how did the dam change those? Would you see that as harming those traditions, or did it sort of just cause traditions to sort of change, and how might we make sense of that?
Reading a report again in preparation for your questions, it was estimated by a number of sources that annual salmon harvest up and down the Columbia, especially at Kettle Falls, averaged sometime between 600,000 and a million salmon.
Wow.
When you think of those numbers in comparison to the people that lived and survived off salmon, because they just weren't harvesting it for consumption, they were harvesting it to trade. A lot of the farmers, a lot of the ranchers, a lot of the communities in the area were salmon was a major trade item. So it was a good part of the tribal economy.
Mm. Awesome. Yeah, cool. So that's a concept we were talking about earlier this year, is economies, right? And how people use resources and things like that. So it's hard when you lose a resource that's, really really close to your economy. Definitely changes things. So how important do you think the Grand Coulee Dam is now to the economy of this area? Right, having grown up here, have you seen the population rise sort of with the dam? Are people still coming here to work for the dam, and how important is it for the economy, you think?
Well, if nothing else, the laser light show that was created in 1989 brings approximately 1.5 million tourists a year
Wow.
into the Grand Coulee Dam. So that alone has to be a major attraction. When you think of Roosevelt, Lake Rufus Woods, and Banks Lake, and what they do on a seasonal and even a non-seasonal basis for tourism, for fisheries, for sports and recreation, that's tremendous. Um, the power issue has to be predominant when you figure that the dam produces about 7,000 megawatts of power, and that power goes throughout the Northwest United States. So the little community of Grand Coulee is a nucleus and a catalyst for a lot of the economy that stretches as far as the urban areas of Seattle and Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, right. Because that brings jobs and things like that. And I'm sure some of our
For
students probably
sure.
have parents and things that work there too. So we talked a little bit about animals. One question from Lucy is, how has the Grand Coulee Dam affected the vegetation in the area? Like, I guess we could say, does it look different around here now that the dam was built? And could that be considered a pro or a con?
There was a major environmental impact study done as recently as 1997. But the purpose of the environmental impact study wasn't just centered around the Grand Coulee Dam. It was to talk about all of the biologic and all of the environmental situations that surround all of Lake Roosevelt, Lake Rufus Woods, Banks Lake, and it actually talked about a environmental process that in that included almost 1,100 miles of open waterway
Wow.
because of the tremendous storage capacity of Lake Rufus, Roosevelt, Lake Rufus Woods, and then what Banks Lake is doing with irrigation and that, and water flowage down into the Columbia Basin. So it talks about the fact that the negatives are we have lost some vegetation that were native to the original Columbia River drainage, some of the different bird species that were affected by it. But it talks about the new riparian growth that have happened because of the dam. And that riparian growth and waterfowl and other species is tremendous because of the new areas that allow for the increased water supply and the vegetation and the riparian growth that spreads out from that water supply. So that's really a positive.
Yeah, so having that big reservoir helps different species of trees and flowers and whatever else near it thrive, even though they might not have done so well before the dam. How about this one? This is an interesting one from James Kensler. Did the tribe ever get a settlement for all they lost from building the dam?
Yes, it did. A couple of things that people don't understand. When Congress created the Reclamation Act in 1931, it was ratified in 1933, Indian tribes weren't recognized as being organized. In 1937, they created what was called the Indian Reorganization Act, and that made tribes create tribal councils, create different entities that would represent tribal bodies. Well, you got to remember that the discussion for the Grand Coulee Dam was happening back in 1925, 1926, through the early 30s, and most definitely well into the 30s and pre-World War II and post-World War II. So the tribes were trying to be involved in the different issues that affected them. First of all, I mentioned earlier that the tribe had to give up about 21,000 acres of real estate up and through the Grand Coulee Dam. Those were not done, quote unquote, by a tribal organized group. They were done by the Department of Interior under the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so they were negotiating a lot of this on behalf of the Colville tribe
Oh,
and the Spokane Indian
so
tribe.
that was land that was originally part of the Colville Reservation.
Reservation,
Wow.
yes,
Okay.
sir. And so when the tribe finally got organized after 1937, going into the 40s, World War II came about, and up until 1945, that sort of stopped a little bit of everything that the tribe was doing as a tribal group. And so in the late 40s, again, organization on behalf of the tribe, they were trying to be involved in what was going to be the benefit of the Grand Coulee Dam for the entire community, not just the native community. Discussions regarding benefit to the Colville tribe or the Spokane tribe probably was not a real priority. So through the 60s and the 70s and 80s, the Colville tribe on many instances tried to pressure Congress to remember that the Columbia River and the waters of the Columbia River was a major asset of the tribe. And so finally in 1994, we were able to settle with the United States Congress on a distribution of dollars from the annual revenue created by the Grand Coulee Dam.
Oh, okay.
And we
So
share that
there's,
every year.
even to this day, there's a sort of an annual
Yes,
payment that goes
get
to the
about
tribe.
14 to $15 million a year
Wow. Okay.
payment.
Excellent.
When you figure that the dam was commemorated on June the 4th, 1942, and settlement happened in 1994, that's a few years distance.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So yeah, that's good. That kind of answers Aiden Don's question too, which he was asking, how is the working relationship between Native Americans and the kind of state interests when they were constructing the dam? And I think we answered that question pretty good. Let's do one last question here. It's come up in a lot of our other questions, is World War II, because that's obviously a huge historical event that impacted the world. So did you come across any of that in your research, or maybe your own experience of just how important the Grand Coulee Dam was for America's victory in World War II?
I'll give you a couple of really good examples. When World War II broke out on, I think it's December 12th, 1942, the dam was in the last stages of construction. In fact, I think the power switch for the dam in a commemoration happened. I think it was December of 41, which is sort of a ceremony, but the actual dam was not operable until 42 and 43 with all the turbines that were coming online. Well,
And for
World War II
context,
had,
we can say that World War II, just for students there, World War II's probably from the late 1930s all the way through 1945. So this is right smack dab in the middle of that. Yeah.
yes, sir. And so what happened with the Grand Coulee Dam being able to create the amount of hydropower they did, the source of most of the aluminum and the two major aircraft builders, Boeing and the other one at Seattle and Portland, happened in the Northwest just because of the Grand Coulee Dam.
Wow.
In
Okay.
fact, in reading one of the reports that I did read, four turbines that were destined for another dam that was under construction at the same time were diverted to the Grand Coulee Dam so that the turbines would be put in place and they would add hydropower because of what Congress wanted to have happen because of World War II and all of the manufacturing and the industrial requirements that we're having with World War II.
Yeah, that
And
must have
the other
taken a
thing
huge
that's
amount of
really
power.
important
Yeah.
is what happened at Richland, Washington with the creation of plutonium.
Mm.
And that was added to the bomb that really was the last stage of World War II.
Ah, so at the Grand Coulee Dam, you're saying the power helped sort of fund that facility. If we weren't at home, I wish we had more time to talk about, the Hanford site, which is a big part of Washington State history, and you guys will have to look into it on your own time. But yeah, Washington was a big player in the development of nuclear weapons. So we can wrap this up here. Are there any sort of final notes? What do you think is the biggest positive for the Grand Coulee Dam, and what do you think is the biggest negative? Just to reiterate.
Well, it's pretty funny because the governor of the state of Washington, at the commencement of the graduating class of 1942, the first graduating class of Grand Coulee Dam High School, he said that as their children and their great grandchildren are able to visit and see the benefits of the Grand Coulee Dam, there is no future date that the Grand Coulee Dam will not have some form of positive impact on the United States of America. It is the single largest source of payback for major federal installation, even in 2020.
How about the biggest negative there, just so we can kind of compare our two sides?
I would say, again, being a tribal member, to me, the biggest negative to me is the fact that the salmon migration, but I think also that outside communities, other than state of Washington, we don't realize the importance of the Grand Coulee Dam. Originally, it was called the eighth wonder of the world.
Wow. I know,
we've lost that.
It's impressive. I remember the first time coming out here and seeing it, being kind of in awe of it, and then after I live down in Coulee Dam, so now I see it every day. You can see it from my classroom, and we start to take it for granted. So, well, I guess, thank you so much for talking with us, Ken. My hope is that, students, when they watch this, can kind of get an idea of how they might orchestrate their own interview and sort of what kind of questions they could ask. Thank you again for meeting with us, and I hope to talk to you soon.
I appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too. Take care.